Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm Jason Miller. My guest today is Brad Montgomery, the Director of Pre-Sales Engineering of the Dell EMC Federal Data Protection Solutions Division. Now, Brad, before break, we were talking about the cloud. And we were talking about the data protections and IT modernization and the way they're all kind of connected. And one of the things that you brought up was the kind of the three steps, right? Simplicity, transparency, efficiency. Mm-hmm. This also then is a great segue into this conversation that I think you kind of hit upon, but let's dig deeper. When it comes to disaster recovery, COOP, backup, this seems to be the part of IT modernization that I get the sense it's not being focused upon enough by CIOs. They want to take the current applications and modernize them, but the backups are just important, and if something goes down. So maybe discuss a little bit about how Dell EMC is kind of helping agencies kind of turn that focus a little bit on these ideas of disaster recovery, COOP, and the like.
That's a great question, and I feel like the conversations that we touched on earlier are a perfect segue into the topic of disaster recovery. We mentioned on how some of the efficiencies that we have with our solutions can be leveraged in the cloud today. One of the areas that many federal agencies are exploring is using the cloud as a disaster recovery target. Disaster recovery as a whole can be a very expensive proposition for customers. It requires a significant amount of infrastructure, requires a secondary site, requires manpower in order to staff that. That may be necessary for certain data sets, but not for all the data sets that an agency has. We can leverage the cloud as that DR target for where the data makes sense. And we can do it very efficiently by only moving a small amount of data and then using the most efficient storage within the cloud, such as object storage, in order to house that data. So the customers are able to have that DR capability. They're able to fail over. We have an automated process to enable a failover to the cloud and automatically spinning up a virtual machine, for example, and then fail back. So the cloud really becomes a very effective way to, again, meet a cloud-first requirement, but also satisfy a very important need, which is disaster recovery within customer environments.
One of the things when you talk about disaster recovery and COOP, that's where those tapes come in. You brought up tapes earlier. I thought we stopped talking about tapes after the Bank of America first real big cyber breach back in 2005 when the tapes fell out of the back of the truck, I think.
Yep.
I thought we stopped talking about tapes back then. But at the same time, there's a cost there, and agencies go, well, I just can't afford to change my backup and my disaster recovery because there's just too much cost there. There's too much there. Where does the efficiency and simplicity come into play? Referring back to our first segment into this disaster recovery conversation.
Great segue. So maybe the impression is out there that tape was an inexpensive solution. That is not the case, because when you factor in the risk associated with tapes, when you factor in the time it takes to get operational again from a tape copy, the value of tape decreases exponentially. Now, what we can provide from a Dell EMC perspective is the same, the same cost of tape, but a much more robust disaster recovery capability. We leverage our technologies with deduplication. We leverage our technologies with instant access to spin up virtual machines. And this gives the customer a usable DR strategy at the lowest cost to protect that we see in the industry today.
I think you make a really interesting point, because one thing about cloud, for instance, that people initially back in 2010 was like, oh, look how cheap it's going to be. And then they're finding it's not so cheap. But now what we hear about is, the capabilities are 2x or 3x for the same cost. And is that kind of also what you're getting to? Is that, hey, it may be about the same as tape, but our capabilities are going to be so much greater.
Well, this is perfect, because this is exactly why we say we want to make sure we use the cloud for where it makes sense. And as customers know who have used public clouds, it's very cheap to get in. It's very expensive to pull out your data, right? So if we can put low access data in the cloud, if we can put data that's designed for long-term retention, remember the 7 years retention for backups, if we can put DR copies of low-risk virtual machines into the cloud, where the odds of us actually having to pull data out are low, then we're using the cloud for where it makes sense. We're making a very smart financial decision, but we're still meeting the requirements that we have for our SLAs.
Are you seeing agencies starting to dip their toe into that disaster recovery COOP in the cloud? Not so much let's use it or not use it, but making that transition, it's part of this IT modernization in some ways.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of agencies move in that direction yet. I mean, it's still a relatively new concept, and the idea of giving your data to a third party to manage, especially in the federal space, is a tough one to wrap your head around. You need to make sure that any solution that you put out there meets the necessary federal requirements when it comes to encryption and FedRAMP certification. And so the shift is happening, and we want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for our customers.
It almost seems like for at least the initial first steps into that part of disaster recovery and COOP is a government-only cloud, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's Dell EMC provides it, but it's only that would give some people be more relaxed about where their data is because they know it's in a government-only cloud. Do you see that discussion? Well, where is it going to live? Is it going to be in the mixed cloud, or is it a government-only cloud, or maybe even it's some sort of contractor-operated, government-owned cloud, like we see DHS has one, for instance, their data centers. Is that part of that discussion yet?
It absolutely is, and obviously within the federal space, we have two large organizations or public cloud companies with Amazon and Azure that have government clouds that meet the necessary FedRAMP certifications. Likewise, Dell EMC has recognized the importance of the cloud. I mean, if you look at Dell Technologies, we have one of the premier enterprise application cloud platforms in VirtuStream. And then we are also seeing a number of agencies build out their own private cloud environments. They recognize the value of the cloud, but they're leery about pushing it out to the public cloud. And that's an area that Dell EMC can also help with, to build out that public cloud, to build out on-prem object storage for customers to use in the use cases that we already mentioned.
Brad, I want to shift our conversation a little bit back around to cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've seen a lot over the last year is ransomware.
Yes.
You probably remember the NotPetya virus. We probably remember the WannaCry, which was really a great success story for agencies in many ways. I've written a lot about that. But at the same time, you guys are also looking at, hey, you have to protect the data from that ransomware, from that cyber destruction. Maybe talk a little bit about how that effort is going and where you see some avenues for agencies to really improve.
Yeah, absolutely. So ransomware is top of mind for our customers. And there is any number of solutions out there that address the intrusion factor. I mean, Dell EMC or Dell Technologies, has RSA. We have SecureWorks. We have best-of-breed solutions to keep the bad guys out. But the number of attack vectors are increasing. All it takes is one phishing scam to be successful for a rogue operator to get admin control within your systems.
I feel like you maybe are bringing up what's that happened in 2015. What was that? What was that attack?
The Sony attack?
Oh no, the OPM one.
Oh, the OPM.
Oh, that
attack.
one. Yeah. One rogue actor getting into a network. Anyways, I interrupted. Go ahead.
Yeah. So and unfortunately, once the bad guy is in the environment, then they can wreak all kinds of havoc. Right? And like I mentioned earlier, they can target the backups first, and that's actually a very preferred methodology. Delete all the backups, kill the catalog, make it so that the end user can't recover their data, and then you put the malware on the production systems. You blow away the production system. This is very close to what happened with the Sony attack many years ago. So from a data protection perspective, we're not worried about keeping the bad guys out. Again, there's other solutions that can do that. But what do we do in a worst case scenario? What do we do if that rogue operator gets in your environment? Or even what do we do if a disgruntled employee wants to wreak some havoc on their last day? All right? These are, again, worst case scenarios, but we need a plan for them. So we focus on avoiding cyber destruction, right? And the way that we need to do that, backup number one is the is the way that all organizations should address that. But again, backups can be vulnerable if someone has admin control. So if you ask a number of security organizations, if you ask the FBI how you address this, you need an air gap solution. You need to create a secure cyber vault that contains a gold copy of your data that is completely immutable. So if you do need to recover, you have that gold copy to recover from.
All right. So how do you do that when the data changes minute by minute, hour by hour, second by second? That my data right this moment is different. Now it's different again. So how do you create that gold backup? And especially if as you mentioned, sometimes agencies are facing a 24-hour backup process.
You have to leverage the technologies that exist today. You have to leverage deduplication. You have to leverage the capability to get the backups completed in a very short amount of time. The air gap solution that Dell EMC has takes the copy from the backup storage. we are able to get a full copy of the data over to the cyber vault in a very, very short amount of time. And this is key because we want to sever that link as quickly as possible because we don't want to introduce any additional vectors for a rogue operator to be able to access that data. And that cyber vault is more than just a hardware solution. It's a full process behind how often the backups are done, what data is being protected. Now, this isn't for all data necessarily. It's for the crown jewels, right? The social security numbers, the credit cards that an organization may have, the data that if it was lost, it would mean devastation for the organization. So that's the data that we want to protect. That's the data that we want to move over based on the SLAs that we have. And we want to set up a security zone so that we can test that data, right? We want to make sure that if by any chance ransomware ended up on the data that was moved over to the cyber vault, we can test it, we can scrub it. If we aren't successful in removing it, we can blow it away and start again. And that's part of the power of having an air gap solution. You can use that as a test bed in order to find the solution and mitigate it before it becomes an issue.
Agencies have spent the last couple of years really focusing on what they call their high-value assets.
Mm-hmm.
What are those crown jewels? I know that the Office of Management and Budget is putting out some new guidance sometime this summer, maybe fall, around HVAs again. So is this idea of this, cyber vault, is that something that agencies are starting to really kind of recognize? How do I take those HVAs that I've spent the last year, really focusing on and identifying and protecting and ensure that there always will be there? What are you hearing from agencies?
It's becoming a lot more prevalent in our conversations. Now, this idea has already taken hold in many of the financial sectors and many of the healthcare sectors as well. We're seeing a huge push in federal also. From a Dell EMC perspective, we follow the NIST guidelines. We want to make sure that we provide a holistic protection strategy, and that recovery component of it is exactly where the cyber vault comes into play.
Brad, this has been a fascinating conversation. The concepts of cyber vault's interesting. The destruction, guarding against destruction is good. If I'm an agency and I'm listening to this, where do I start? I'm not at 0. I'm not at 100, right? Where do I go? What are some of the takeaways? What are some of the maybe even the common potholes that you see that agencies tend to maybe step in too often?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say that the takeaway is that when it comes to a sound data protection strategy, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. You have different use cases within an environment. They have different SLAs. You can't apply a single solution across all of those. So customers need to look for a very consultative approach from the vendors that they're talking to, once we're able to identify what the SLAs are, identify what the pain points are, we can make a solution that is designed to, again, meet those modernization goals that we set out, add efficiency to the environment, simplify the environment, bring transparency back to the customers.
It almost seems to me like what you're saying is, don't just try to eat the apple in one big bite. Or boil the ocean, whatever the old adages have been over the years. But okay, we're going to protect this set of data. How do we do it? Okay, now it's this set of data. How do we do it? It's almost like take that. I want to call it piecemeal because that always gets a bad rap. But iterative approach, agile approach, if you will.
I like that. I like that a lot. And but again, we have to be careful though, because you don't want to silo your solutions, right? You want to have a solution that has the flexibility and the integration across all these different pieces and components, so you can provide a holistic approach to data protection across all of those use cases that you mentioned.
Excellent advice. Unfortunately, though, Brad, we are out of time, so let me thank my guest, Brad Montgomery, the Director of Pre-Sales Engineering of the Dell EMC Federal Data Protection Solutions Division. Brad, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. This is a lot of fun.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search innovation.